On June 22nd, we're going to be hosting an online event via Zoom dedicated to overcoming religious trauma. It's a vital topic, but it's also not an easy one. This morning, I'm hoping to set the stage for that event. And if you have suffered religious or spiritual abuse, including sexual abuse and systemic abuses like racism in a religious context, and if this is a difficult conversation for you, please be kind to yourself and listen when you're ready. Several years ago, I was in a small group at an ecumenical Franciscan retreat, and we were sharing about our spiritual journeys, our personal journeys, grieving all the difficult things that happened and celebrating the beautiful things that had unfolded in our lives. And it happened that I was the only person in that small group that had grown up in a conservative church. So when my turn came around, it was a little bit like being at the zoo, right? They had lots of questions. So what is it like? I've seen Jesus Camp. Was it like that? Yeah, kind of like that. So it's not a conversation that I have often, but I wasn't uncomfortable and I shared freely. Maybe it turns out a little too freely. It was only about halfway through their questions that I realized that the group had become increasingly quiet and some of their jaws had almost reached the floor. I was confused because I wasn't sharing anything unusual for people who had grown up in my religious community. I knew I wasn't sharing happy stories, but I didn't think the stories would be shocking. My friends, they had expected the gender and sexuality antagonism, the casual hate for anyone who isn't straight. They had expected the sexual repression, complete with purity rings and the accompanying guilt that went with it. They had even expected the anti-evolution tirades and dismissal of basic science, but they were not prepared for how thoroughly we were taught to hate ourselves as young children, or how we were trained to go through life making decisions based on fear of eternal torment. I first noticed the shocked looks on their faces about halfway through a story of how my childhood pastor would gather the little children around him from time to time to teach a special lesson. And he had these big square cut nails, carpenter nails, right, that were supposed to look like spikes they would have used to crucify someone. And he would pass those nails around and he'd say, push them into your hand. Feel how that feels. And then he had a crown that was woven out of locust branches, those 2 and 3 inch thorns of the locust tree. And he would pass that crown of thorns around and he'd say, feel it, press it, feel the thorns. Don't put it on, it'll get caught in your hair. He was specific about that, but just feel it. And again, we were told to feel it and to feel that pain. We were specifically told to imagine how much Jesus suffered when he was nailed to a cross, bleeding and suffocating to death. But all that was just building up to the real point, when we were reminded that Jesus had to suffer all of that because of how sinful, and it was never abstract, it was how sinful I am. In fact, even if everyone else on earth had been perfect, I was told, Jesus would have still had to die on the cross to pay for my sins. There was not much of a line between Jesus died for your sins and you killed Jesus. Admittedly, some of the kids just thought it was really cool to play with replicas of devices of torture while at church. But for a lot of us, those memories were seared onto our minds. I was a little child, and I had not had much of a chance to do anything, let alone do anything sinful. But this message was pounded into our brains from the earliest ages and then recalled at every opportunity. Primed in this way, it was not very difficult to convince me, for example, that being a genderqueer and bisexual person was evil. I had been trained to believe I was evil for as long as I could remember. Growing up just meant that they could start filling in the blanks from their list of sins. Yeah, this is you. See, we told you you were evil, and this is how we know now. And when I say they, I mean anyone who could present themselves as a religious authority and who usually wanted to influence or control my behavior, and that was a toxic combination. Since their authority was blessed by an omnipotent God, it was difficult to doubt, let alone resist, an adult who towered over you physically, especially when a wrathful God was backing them up. We're usually reassured that people who did this did not have any ill intent. And even if that's true, it needs to be said, it doesn't change the reality of the harm. Perhaps they really believed that convincing us we were evil was a small price to pay if it brought about a conversion experience. After all, it worked. I made a profession of faith and was baptized when I was 6 years old. Grateful to wash all of that evil out of my tiny little heart. But that was only the beginning, and the control extended well beyond getting me to be baptized or to volunteer at Vacation Bible School. For example, during middle school, I became interested in studying medicine, and I had it all lined out. And that interest then developed into curiosity of biochemistry, and I was really excited. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I was really hoping to shape a life in one of those fields. But about this same time, our church youth group attended a summer camp that was literally called Spiritual Boot Camp. Not only did people put cornflakes and toothpaste in the toes of my tennis shoes, but also the random adult assigned as my small group leader went to great lengths to explain to me that God had given me great gifts, that studying medicine or biochemistry would be a waste of those gifts, and I would be worshiping Satan if I pursued scientific studies. Instead, can you guess? I should become a minister. It wasn't the first or the last time I would be pressured in that way. I resisted as best as I could, but I had been groomed for that kind of manipulation. Like for so many others, I was also experiencing abuse in other ways, and it felt so complicated because religion exacerbated all those harms, but it also gave me a few tools for coping with the wounds. Giving in seemed like a small price to pay to avoid eternal damnation. So, and instead of learning what should have been basic life skills as a child, things like learning how to recognize harm, how to set boundaries, how to heal where healing was needed, and how to act on behalf of my own well-being, I learned to repress my feelings. I learned to repress my doubts, to repress my gender and sexuality, to repress my grief and rage at injustice and oppression. I learned to perform and to conform to expectations while generally hiding the hurts. After all, drawing attention to the unhealed psychological wounds, that's the last thing you wanted to do, isn't it? That would just bring more a judgment on me. It wasn't safe to need help. I think I need to say that again. It was not safe to need help. As a result, unlearning those bad habits and learning healthy habits took a bigger part of my life, culminating in finally being able to leave my childhood denomination back in 2007. I was over 30 years old. I'm a private person. I'm only sharing these glimpses into my life because so many people are still suffering from the pain of religious abuse and trauma. I'm not trying to say anything new today because the concept of religious and spiritual abuse isn't new. But many people trapped inside of abusive institutions still don't have access to information, resources, and healing that could make a tremendous difference in their lives. And it's not an exaggeration to say that helping one another better understand these issues saves lives. From the wife who is convinced to stay with a violent husband in order to witness to him and save his soul, to the gay teen who dies by suicide because he was taught he was evil. Religious and spiritual abuse is deadly. And if we want to keep moving forward, we need to keep pursuing ways that prevent abuse, that heal it whenever it tragically occurs, and that create communities that are instead oriented around reason, curiosity, compassion, and wisdom. While the need may be obvious, the tools are still in development. The research has been more limited than you might expect. It's almost like there's a vested interest, right, in keeping us from understanding religious abuse. But both researchers and practitioners have made progress. In 2012, Dr. Marlene Winnell first described religious trauma syndrome, RTS, which grew out of several existing psychological models such as post-traumatic stress disorder, complex PTSD, shattered assumptions theory, and betrayal trauma theory. A key concept in the model is that of toxic religious experiences, and it's got two components, teachings and practices. The first component, toxic teachings, she said, is especially made up of teachings that teach you that you are about inherent depravity and violent punishment. Sound familiar? She wrote, in fundamentalist Christianity, these would be doctrines of original sin and hellfire. I call these horror and the terror. Basically, toxic religions and toxic Christianity in particular teach people two core messages. You are not okay, and you are not safe. These are the core assumptions that former believers can potentially carry for decades beyond giving up their religion. She wrote, they are ideas that are deep and unconscious out of sheer repetition and childhood indoctrination. The second component are those toxic practices, how the teachings are both taught and enforced in religious institutions, churches, schools, and relationships. And she listed things like isolating children from the larger world, limiting what information they have access to, and using corporal punishment. In my experience, one of the main practices that was used was that we were rewarded with acceptance for professing certain beliefs, and we were threatened with rejection if we did not. We were trained to believe that we did not deserve to be loved, that we were utterly evil, and that we deserved instead to go to hell. With that horror and terror fresh in our minds, we were then told that we could experience God's love. See, there's a way out. You can experience God's love if we only acknowledged how evil we were and promised to conform to some very particular commandments. Both the church's and God's approval were at stake. But if we failed, we could be forgiven, because forgiveness in this mode, it didn't disrupt the system at all. In the practice of confessing our sins and rededicating our lives, we were also confirming the teachings that you are not okay and you are not safe. That was a clever and powerful trap and fertile ground for religious trauma. Dr. Minwell described the causes of religious trauma syndrome in 4 ways, and I'd like to read them with you. I think you'll recognize these 4 causes. 1 is suppression of normal child development. Cognitive, social, emotional, moral stages are arrested. That's a lot of what I was referring to in my earlier stories. The second is damage to normal thinking and feeling abilities. Information is limited and controlled. Dysfunctional beliefs are taught. Independent thinking condemned. Feelings condemned. Third, external locus of control. Knowledge is revealed. It's not discovered. Hierarchy of authority is enforced, and you are not a reliable or good source for information. And the fourth one, physical and sexual abuse. Patriarchal power, unhealthy sexual views, punishment used as discipline. If you're an outsider to these kinds of religious cultures and systems, it's probably easy to believe that these causes are unusual and that people like me must have grown up in some obscure Christian cult. In fact, it was the opposite. I grew up in a church that belonged to the largest Protestant denomination in the United States, the Southern Baptist Convention. I don't believe that Southern Baptists are particularly unique in the harms that they caused and continue to cause in my and so many other lives. And I'm not trying to single out this tradition in a malicious way. I want to share about it because this is a tradition I experienced firsthand. But since I am going to be critical, I'm going to stick close to the public record using 2 examples of how abuse of authority, coercion, and deceit can become part of how a religious institution operates by default, its culture and practice, namely racism and sexual abuse. Though other issues were involved, the Southern Baptist Convention began in 1845 as an institutional response to justify slavery and protect those who profited from enslaving and exploiting human beings. Many Baptist leaders in the South were already prolific apologists for slavery and white supremacy, a trend that only deepened after the split with Northern Baptists. Richard Furman, who was instrumental in consolidating Southern Baptists and served as president of the South Carolina State Baptist Convention, is a good example of this. On Christmas Eve of 1822, Furman earnestly wrote to the governor of South Carolina. And he said, I'm choosing one of the more tame quotes here. If you're really interested in this, will be a link in the manuscript if you want to read the whole letter. But he wrote, "The advocates for emancipation blend the ideas of injustice and cruelty with those with respect the existence of slavery and consider them as inseparable." That's the good part, right? He got that right. Of course we do. Of course we say it is impossible to enslave a human being and have any kind of sense of justice. It's impossible to enslave a human being and it not be cruel, to not reduce their human dignity, to not dehumanize people. Of course we blend those two together. But he followed that sentence up with say, but surely they may be separated. Hurts to even read this. A bondservant may be treated with justice and humanity as a servant, and a master may, in an important sense, be the guardian and even father of his slaves. The Southern Baptist Convention was born from this horrifying delusion, believing that one could justifiably and even morally engage in a blatantly immoral, cruel, violent, and dehumanizing system of oppression for economic gain. And moreover, the denomination did not officially apologize for its support of slavery until 1995, right? They were formed in 1845, 150 years. They sat on that sin and didn't even officially acknowledge it until in 1995, when they finally wrote in a resolution, "Our relationship to African Americans has been hindered from the beginning by the role that slavery played in the formation of the Southern Baptist Convention. Many of our forebears defended the right to own slaves and either participated in, supported, or acquiesced in the particularly inhumane nature of American slavery. In later years, Southern Baptists failed in many cases to support and in some cases opposed legitimate initiatives to secure the civil rights of African Americans." As you might guess or know, despite the overture, a convention resolution could not magically erase 150 years of injustice. It could not magically heal lives and broken relationships, and it could not transform attitudes, habits, and institutions all by itself. And in fact, the Southern Baptist Convention and its member churches continue to struggle with racism and its harm. Paul Harvey, professor of history at University of Colorado in Colorado Springs, pointed this out in response to a 2018 report on slavery and racism by Southern Seminary. He wrote, "The Southern Baptist Seminary, and by extension the denomination leaders, they did a very good job reckoning with the past and a not so good job reckoning with the present." As if to prove Harvey's point, the Southern Baptist Convention Council of Seminary Presidents made a statement just recently, November 2020, that while they earnestly oppose racism, quote, "critical race theory, intersectionality, and any version of critical theory is incompatible with the Baptist faith and message." In other words, you shouldn't teach critical race theory at any Southern Baptist seminary. And the strong implication is that no Southern Baptist should study, be influenced by, or use these critical tools. This is simply terrible. Critical race theory has been around since at least the 1970s, but it's only recently attracted the attention of and resistance from many white people. And that tells us a whole lot about how poorly most of us white people are at listening to anyone who doesn't prop up our white privilege. At least two black pastors, Charlie Dates of Chicago's Progressive Baptist Church and Ralph D. West of Houston's The Church Without Walls, got the message, though, and they withdrew their large churches from the Southern Baptist Convention. As Dr. Dates asked, how did they, who in 2020 still don't have a single black denominational entity head, reject once and for all a theory that helps to frame the real race problems we face? It's no secret that this kind of cultural and institutional injustice also supports an atmosphere where other kinds of abuse can thrive. This is most easily seen in the ongoing struggle in Southern Baptist churches and institutions to overlook, hide, and sometimes even to protect sexual abusers. The Houston Chronicle published a 6-part series in 2019 on just this situation. The first installment, by Robert Downen, Lisa Olson, and John Tedesco, ran with the following headline: Abuse of Faith, 20 years, 700 victims. Southern Baptist sexual abuse spreads as leaders resist reforms. Together with investigators from the San Antonio Express News, they found that since 1998, roughly 380 Southern Baptist church leaders and volunteers have faced allegations of sexual misconduct. Of the more than 700 victims, many were further abused by the response of their churches and institutions and communities, including being shunned, being urged, coerced, right, to forgive their abusers, and to get abortions. Many of the victims were children, mostly adolescents, some as young as 3 years old. Although cases are still pending, more than 200 offenders were convicted or took a plea deal. These were church leaders and volunteers, from pastors to youth ministers to Sunday school teachers. At least 35 church pastors, employees, and volunteers who exhibited predatory behavior were still able to get a job at another church during the last 2 decades. Incredibly, one registered sex offender went on to become the principal officer at a Houston nonprofit that works with student organizations called Touching the Future Today. The failure to, that's just so terrible. Oh, yeah, I have to regain my composure after recalling that. The failure to protect victims was widespread and institutional. Criticisms by victims for concealing or mishandling abuse complaints included several past presidents and prominent leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention. All of this is part of the Southern Baptist Convention's generally patriarchal culture. As Susan Shaw observed in her article on how Southern Baptist beliefs about gender and power contributed to the sexual abuse scandal, Baptist beliefs about repentance and forgiveness make restitution for sexual abuse, we could enlarge that to any abuse, right? But make restitution for sexual abuse unnecessary. If a perpetrator claims he has repented, that confession is adequate for forgiveness by God, the church, and the male leadership of the denomination. No consequences are necessary, and certainly no recompense to the survivor is required. She wrote, to take abuse seriously and to take action would challenge Southern Baptist male power. This patriarchalism connects with many expressions of abuse, including the abuse that gender and sexual minorities typically experience in religious contexts like that. With so much work to be done and on so many different levels, it is easy to be overwhelmed. And that is another way that abusive systems insulate themselves against change, because it doesn't happen on accident. It takes intentional, hard work to root it out. But I've also found another really common obstacle, and that is the appearance of goodness. The Southern Baptist Convention and its member churches and institutions are made up of what we would generally call good, upstanding people. This makes it possible for religious and spiritual abuse, like so many other kinds of abuse, to be easily hidden in plain sight. Southern Baptist Convention proved that an organization can find ways to justify and even celebrate abuse as egregious as slavery. And they proved that an organization can preach a purity culture that props up patriarchalism while simultaneously hiding horrendous patterns of sexual abuse. These widespread systems of harm are then enmeshed in doctrines that teach people, especially children, that they are inherently evil and worthy of eternal torment in hell. The only escape is to accept and act in conformity with beliefs that are then immune from scientific inquiry and ethical accountability. Otherwise, you just learn again, you are not okay, you are not safe. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the Southern Baptist tradition is particularly unique in the harm it has caused and causes in my and so many other people's lives. And I could throw out the usual caveats that there are a lot of very good people who belong to Southern Baptist churches. I used to be one of them. But it's easy to use that kind of thinking to tolerate and ignore religious abuse. Instead, we need to ask and keep asking the very good people in our lives, what are they doing to change the communities, churches, institutions, and cultures that are harming so many people? And if they are not working for change, we need to ask those very good people why they are still associated with abusive institutions. Because when a good person learns that someone is using a position of authority to harm others, they don't look the other way. They stop the harm with every fiber of their being. We all, especially those of us who still belong to communities of faith, have a responsibility to bring religious and spiritual abuse to an end, to do everything we can to provide resources for healing, and to demand accountability and change for our institutions and leaders. It's easy to want to shy away from this kind of work, especially when religious institutions are already in decline. But that can never, ever be an excuse. If an institution can't survive without tolerating or protecting abuse, then it does not deserve to survive. Instead, we will keep reclaiming our dignity. Your voice is important. Your needs are valid, and your healing is sacred. You deserve to live free from the gnawing fear of condemnation and eternal torture. You deserve to be able to love yourself and your body. You deserve to know and express and experience love and community without being coerced. You deserve to feel and to be safe and to belong to a community that isn't built around delusions and threats, but around reason, curiosity, wisdom, compassion, and love. And I am so grateful to each one of you who are committed to living out that vision and who work together to make it real. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.